Anger over growing social inequality, the cost of living, falling faith in governments and institutions, among other factors, are expected to fuel incidences of strikes, riots, and civil commotion around the world. And that was according to a report released in February last year by Alliance Global Corporate and Specialty. Now, that report highlighted a rising level of risk environment for businesses that could result in disruptions, material damage, and significant loss of income. Now let's bring in my guest on this from the United Kingdom, Agnes Gitau, the managing partner at GBS Africa. She's also the executive director of Eastern African Association for UK and Europe. A good evening to you out of London tonight, madam. Thank you very much. Now, we've seen violent protests against socio-economic policies and actions of governments in Kenya, in Nigeria. We've seen businesses protesting tax issues in Uganda as well in recent times. What do you make of these protests around labor union, wages, tax, subsidies, whether it's in Nigeria and elsewhere?
Thank you very much for having me, Boston. It's been a summer of unrest, right, with many people's hopes and scenes of riots and protests across our headlines. These protests, as you highlighted from that report by Allianz, are not just a reaction to the economic hardship. They're a direct indictment of bad governance and its failure to address systematic issues. We've witnessed high rates of unemployment, widespread corruption, and economic mismanagement across the countries, right? These, amplified by digital activism, has really fueled this wave of protest across our countries, with Kenya, a key economy in East Africa, and Nigeria, another key economy in West Africa. So what happens, Boston? Investors will be hesitant to commit capital in the environments where corruption erodes trust and governance fails to protect the interests of the investment, but also the security of their employees. The solution, Boston, governments must prioritize transparency, accountability, rooting out corruption at every level, but also reassuring investment confidence, creating an environment that investors and also citizens can work and participate in the development of these economies. Of course, when this report was released last year, I'm sure a lot of us put it at the back. At the back, we didn't really look at the issues, we didn't look at the issues that it highlighted. We're seeing them now in real time in key economies, the UK also included.
Interesting, but if we stick with Africa, do you think African economies and political leaders are doing enough right now to deliver on socio-economic promises and agenda? For example, President Ruto and his team had gone through a lot of hot water, as it were, over the last month or so, over the Finance Act for this year. It has a new cabinet now being inaugurated. And of course, the news is that some of the issues around tax in Kenya will have to be brought back. Well, what more needs to be done and urgently to deliver socio-economic values to the people?
Austin, you and I have had various conversations where African economies have shown promise. There are huge opportunities, real opportunities for real participation of all people. There is clearly a gap between leadership and social economic promises and their actual delivery, right? The democratic processes require strengthening to ensure that governance is transparent, accountable, and inclusive, right? We have incredible economic policies. They need to be practical, but also be real in addressing job creation, inequality, and issues around climate change. Another issue, Boston, I'd like to highlight is the role of industry leaders. There is rising shareholder and digital activism driving or demanding for ethical and social responsible practices. We're seeing movements that are reshaping consumer behavior, right? We saw that in Kenya, we saw that in Nigeria, where protesters are calling out businesses and politicians or businesses that align with the political class that do not serve them. So while there is a lot of change, we've seen the response, as you highlighted, by Kenya's president, recalling, firing a cabinet, bringing in new people. The real result will be seen if the promises are actually implemented rather than rhetoric, right? Because that's what we see across the region. Incredible promises,
Yes.
but the implementation of this becomes a challenge.
You run an advisory firm out of the UK. You are also the executive director in charge of Eastern Africa Association. You're also part of the East Africa's arbitrators. So, in terms of sentiments among Africans like yourself in the diaspora, Agnes, looking at the spate of protests in a number of African economies, Nigeria, for example, over fuel subsidy and the cost of living. You talk about the Finance Act in the UK, in Kenya, for example, and of course the budget and the cost of running business. You've had folks, businesses in Uganda over a couple of days and weeks suspending businesses because they're unhappy with the government collection of higher taxes, as it were. So when you put all of this together, Agnes, are you seeing a sense somehow that those of us on the continent, yes, on this side of the Atlantic, but those of you who are out there in the diaspora watching all these events in the news on a daily basis, what's the sentiment out there about how things are running? What are you folks talking about in the diaspora?
Thank you very much, Boston. The sentiment for us really is of concern, solidarity, but also vigilance, right? On one hand, we feel a deep connection to what's happening back home. We see the frustrations around the struggles of economic hardship, high rates, high cost of living, and also instability, and seeing many of our folks in the streets, right? On the other hand, the rise of far-right movements in Europe and recent protests in the UK, driven by anti-immigration rhetoric, is also a concern for us, right? And adds a layer of anxiety for millions of Africans working in the diaspora. The contribution of African in the diaspora to the UK economy is critical. Right? We constantly talk about diaspora remittance back home, but we fail to highlight the important role Africans in the diaspora play in supporting the economies where they live, right? So misinformation, and we've seen that across Europe, and that has motivated far-right narratives, often painting immigrants as a threat or a cause of economic wars in this country is untrue, and that has to be challenged. I think our role for us in the diaspora is to advocate for correct information, but also support in the face of these challenges. I think also we remain engaged to issues back home, advising, as you said, advising where we see fit, advising our government on best policies that can both support our economy, but at the same time, support investment in the region. And within, particularly for the migrants living abroad, I think the role is to, of course, adhere to the rule of law, but most importantly, engage and contribute to their economies positively. But as members of the diaspora, we stand at a crossroad of this movement with a unique responsibility, as I say, to contribute, engage, advocate, and most importantly, Boston is information and advisory role, right? We play two roles, both as ambassadors for our countries, but also supporting our countries.
Just on a final note, Agnes, tell me more about some of those key events on your calendar for this year. I'm sure you have the East Africa's arbitrators event, which I'm very fond of, by the way, when it talks about the arbitration part of business. I love that, what you call the business law.
Absolutely. I think it's important to reassure investment that whenever there is a dispute, the continent has the capacity to address this commercial and investment dispute effectively to ensure that business continues to operate. But key events for our calendar really, again, aimed at providing that information. We're looking forward, of course, to the Africa Free Trade Continental Summit, really that is going to promote the role of manufacturing in the continent, attracting businesses to invest in our region. The other key event or key forum we're looking forward to is the East African Association annual lecture. This will highlight or showcase Africa's competitiveness as an opportunity to mobilize global capital. We're aware the scenes we've seen across the summer of protests and running battles between citizens and the police. Of course, they are quite worrying for investment. So the lecture really is an opportunity for us to reassure investor confidence, but at the same time promote our countries as, despite the summer of this content, that they are opportunities for investment.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you so much. We look forward to a whole lot of positive things coming out of the continent. Thank you so much for your time as always on the Rice Exchange. We appreciate Agnes Gitau, Executive Director at Eastern Africa Association for UK and Europe and Managing Partner at GBS Africa.